Hello out there. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next and what is the final of the BCT Conservation Webinar Series for 2023. My name is Joel Stibbard and I am an ecologist here at the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, or the BCT. Today we're going to talk all things citizen science, a field that aims to combine research and community engagement for the betterment of our scientific understanding. But although it's been around for a while, citizen science, it's yet to become a common practice for private landholders and for land managers as part of their land management approach. So, what is the current attitude towards citizen science in research institutions? What are some of the benefits that citizen science can bring to species conservation? And how can you get involved? Well, these are all great questions. I'm glad I asked them, and we'll hope to cover them for you today. And while we're talking the collection of ecological data by citizen scientists and landholders, it is important to recognise the deep understanding of country by Aboriginal people who represent our first citizen scientists, with a connection far beyond that which modern science tries to teach. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet today, recognising their ongoing connection to land, waters and culture. I am on Darug country in Parramatta, and I know we have people calling in from right across New South Wales and even further afield. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people with us today. So with us to talk citizen science, we have Dr Erin Roger from the CSIRO and the Atlas of Living Australia, or ALA. Hello, Erin. And we have Dr Joanna Haddock from the Saving Our Species program, the department's SOS program. We love our acronyms around here. Erin will be discussing the increasing importance of citizen science in our understanding of species distributions and for biosecurity, among other things. And Jo will be highlighting her Bats in Backyards citizen science program and how you might be able to get involved. How are we both today? Good?
Great.
Excellent,
Thanks,
excellent. So once we hear from both Erin and Jo, I'll briefly cover off on some of the existing opportunities available for landholders and the public to easily contribute citizen science data towards ongoing projects through the use of smartphone apps. And smartphones, basically, we all own them these days, don't we? And then we'll get into some Q&A like normal. Our live audience has a chance to pose questions via the Slido function, which we'll hopefully get to. And as always, we'll seek to provide comment on anything we don't cover in our follow-up email to those that are registered today. So to start with, we'll go to Dr. Erin Roger. Thank you very much for being involved.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. All right, so I'm hoping everyone can see the slides. Before I begin, I just also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we're all meeting today. I'm usually on Gadigal land, otherwise known as Sydney, but I'm actually up on Kabi country on the Sunshine Coast attending the Australian Citizen Science Association's conference, which is pretty topical given the webinar today. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues at the ALA who have contributed information about what I'm going to speak about today. All right, next slide, please. So for those of you that don't know very much about the Atlas of Living Australia, or ALA, we are Australia's largest open source biodiversity data aggregator. We've got a lot of different kinds of data. We have absence data, we have systematic survey data, but by far the largest volume of data is occurrence data or settings observations. And so this is from a paper that was published a few months ago where a few of us in the Atlas partitioned the data in the ALA into citizen science and non-citizen science. And by non-citizen science, I mean everything else. So the data that we pull from government, which is a large source, research and industry, as well as museums and collections. And so as you can see, when the ALA started in 2010, is about even. We focused initially a lot on museums and collections, but the volume of citizen science data has absolutely grown over time, and this is stark. All right, over to the next slide. So these figures are also from the same paper, and just to draw your attention to that donut, when we did this work a couple of years ago, it was a roughly 50-50 split in the Atlas between percentage of citizen science data and non-citizen science data. But I think even in the 2 years since we did this, this percentage has changed. And the reason why is because we had a look at just the data that we pulled in, the occurrence records that we pulled in just last year. This is some work by Cam Fletcher, also at the Atlas. And so we added about 10 million observation records. So we have a total of around 135 million now. And about 95% of these occurrence records are coming from citizen science. Of course, a large volume of that is bird data. Everyone loves birds, but a really important source of information for everyone now is iNaturalist, because it's actually giving us a greater diversity in taxa, which is so important. All right, over to the next slide. So this is again from that same paper I referred to, where we wanted to look at what, again, looking at non-citizen science and citizen science contribution, we looked at a range of different species. And this, the Richmond birdwing butterfly, it's a range-restricted species. You can see that it's about equal in terms of total observational records contributed by citizen science and non-citizen science sources. But at the same time, this presents an interesting picture so far that citizen science is still enhancing our understanding of the distribution of this range-restricted species. And then on to the next slide. And this should be the last one from this paper. This one's from the black rock cod, another range-restricted species. And we can see that citizen science is about double in terms of the contribution of total observation records. So really, really important data source for the black rock cod. And it's also contributing really important information around spatial distribution. So I guess I've presented this just to give you an understanding that citizen science data is worthy in terms of thinking about it as a complementary source of information. But there are some species in the atlas of which we only have information about because of citizen science. And so there are records only from some sources. And I think that's a really critical piece of information to present. And an example here is this species where we only have 36 records in the ALA, and they're all from iNaturalist. So moving on. So this is just some information. So now we understand about the sort of records that we have in the atlas. This is some information, again, presented by Cam Fletcher around who is using the atlas. And as you can see, and we've partitioned this into Commonwealth and then state and territory jurisdictions. And so there's a lot of users. Definitely, there's a correlation between population size of the state and territory versus the number of users of the ALA, which makes sense, and more users on the East Coast. But we're well represented across states and territories. And then the pie graph, and this wouldn't be surprising, is businesses that use the ALA. So this is getting into our industry users. And of course, not terribly surprising that the bulk of users are there for environmental or scientific surveys, with education, the education sector in there as well as mining and agriculture. All right, move on. But everything, of course, is not rosy with citizen science, and I don't mean to come across as such. And I think, and first I'll touch on the sort of broad issues around citizen science, and then those more specific to data. So the first one, of course, is because citizen science, although it isn't new, it's been around for hundreds of years. Our earliest scientists were citizen scientists. I don't think we fully established the training structures and the frameworks around citizen science. And there's a lot of outstanding challenges that have certainly been discussed here at the conference around funding and training and synergies between other sources of information. And despite there being a myriad of scientific publications around the impact of citizen science, the use of citizen science, and the value of citizen science, there remain mixed attitudes around its value. And managing ethics is becoming a really big one. It's quite a gray area. And by human, I mean, how do we properly recognize and attribute the contributions of citizen science? How do we prevent exploitation, for example, given that they become such a valuable but free source of information? And then the issue around animal ethics as well. Very challenging for projects let out of communities to seek the proper licenses. And then in terms of data or methodological, so this figure is from a paper that was done based on the Global Biodiversity Information Frameworks data set. So the ALA is a node of GBIF, and we give all of our data, which presents a really rich global picture of biodiversity. But we have many of the same challenges that GBIF does. So I alluded to the bias in bird records in the ALA. And so we obviously have some taxa that are very well represented in the ALA and others that aren't. And we're actually looking to replicate this work that GBIF has done in this paper. And so, of course, there's taxonomic challenges with citizen science. There's coverage issues that I think Joe will talk about. And then the interoperability of citizen science is the big one. And just finishing with sensitive data. So I think we do a good job with threatened species, but there's also implications with trade sensitive species that need to be worked through, for example, and how do we manage these properly? Moving on. So this is an interesting article that was just on the ABC a few days ago, where there was some querying by a developer over the presence of a platypus down in the Illawarra. And so this platypus or platypi had been observed by citizen scientists and logged, and there was photographic evidence, but the developer was holding this against their own surveys that they conducted, which found only absences. And I think this is raising a really interesting challenge for citizen science. So we know that some data isn't used in court, for example, to prosecute. And so it's setting up some really interesting legal questions and challenges on what is robust data. But I'm here to argue that regardless of how this lands, and I think the ALA has a role in this, we should be thinking about citizen science as a complementary source of data, and there's no question. And this is some information direct from the ALA on the distribution of princess parrots. And we can see the circled records are clearly not princess parrots observations, but they did not come from citizen science. The ones in the middle where the correct distribution did. And I won't name the data source, but at the very least, we should be open to looking at about all different kinds of data source and then making choices on what data we use accordingly. And moving on. So, but some good news story and a case study of impact, which I think is really important for citizen science going forward. So a few years ago, the ALA, we partnered with the Federal Department of Agricultural, Fisheries and Forestry. And so they knew that we had good biodiversity data in the ALA, and with that, some good information on invasive species. And so we piloted a program where we received a list from the Chief Environmental Biosecurity Office, and later on the Plant Protection Office as well, where we got the list of species, run a bit of a QA/QC process on that list, and then once a week when a species of interest comes into the ALA that's matched to the list, we ping them with a biosecurity alert email. And so that record, that email has the scientific name, the common name if it's available, the state, and the provider of that data. And importantly, about 95% of our records for the biosecurity alert system are coming in through our naturalist, a few from apps like FeroScan, et cetera. And so on that alert email, we've got the location, and they can click through for more spatial information and also to the record, and of course a photo if it's available. And we'll move on to the next slide. And so we have been expanding our biosecurity alert program to other jurisdictions this year. We've added improved functionality, such as being able to send an alert about something when it's recorded outside of its known distribution. So a cane toad is a good example where they didn't want an alert every time a record was lodged in the ALA, but they did want to know when it was outside of its expected area. And so here, it sounds like we paid Steve from Biosecurity Queensland to write this for us, but we've been asking our users who are now in governments in every state and territory, with the exception of the Northern Territory and South Australia. And they include federal, state and territory biosecurity agencies and land management agencies, and then several areas within those agencies that look after aquatic pests, plant diseases, insects, etc. And so Steve said that the biosecurity alert system has absolutely enhanced their statewide surveillance, and he attributed this mainly to the 18,000 iNaturalist users in Queensland. And he gave some examples, some case studies of where there's been active mitigation as a result of the biosecurity alert. And one was when we sent this alert about this cactus. A few days later, they went to the site that it was reported in. They eradicated the 2 plants that they located, found a likely source and illegal dumping in this case, and then went on to say how important it is that they get on top of these detections of these invasive species, and that citizen science is this amazing vehicle for having more eyes and ears on the ground for these sorts of things. So we're trying to sell this message far and wide because it really does show impact between what people are observing out in the natural environment and then direct kind of mitigation from management as a result, and potentially also informing policy. So we'll move on. And so just wrapping up over the next few slides, I'd like to think about how we frame citizen science. And I'm still kind of working around on this model about kind of tiers of and phases of environmental monitoring, and noting that the dashed lines are there because there's absolutely movement between all of those circles. So if we think about Indigenous knowledge and representing kind of their traditional ways of understanding the change through generations, there's some amazing Maori women that work in biosecurity in Queensland, and they talk about walking backward into the future, which is a really wonderful way of framing their thinking around this space. And then we can move on to specimen-based collection, which of course has been around for many, many years. It has a much narrower workforce though, but generally broad taxonomic scope, but it's quite labor intensive and it's really difficult to scale. We can again think about this complemented by citizen science, where it's got a much larger workforce, a real ability to scale, as we saw by those first slides, but typically a very narrow or taxonomic scope with those biases in citizen science data that I was talking about earlier. And then how all of this is enhanced by things like remote sensing, AI, acoustics, all of that. And we really should be thinking about all of these different sources in the context of environmental monitoring. And move on. And so just finally, just to wrap up, in terms of where the Atlas wants to go next, we absolutely need to start positioning ourselves and how we can start directing citizen science effort to fill those spatial and taxonomic gaps that we were talking about earlier. We want to assist in guidelines on how to collect higher quality data. So we know that there's some taxa that the data quality is excellent, but there's other that guidelines in terms of how to properly record an image and what sort of features under ideal conditions you can look for. We want to help out that aspect as well. And then provide some structure around citizen science contribution. And I think it's important to think about gradients of citizen science. So they used to have an app, we've decommissioned it now, where anyone could put in an observation, but there didn't need to be an associated photo or acoustic record with that. And so that, because it's not really verifiable, we can think about as having kind of low grade citizen science. But that's on the spectrum, and we can think about Frog ID, which I know is widely used by the BCT in partnership, which has kind of expert validation behind it. And then apps like iNaturalist that need, at least 2 individuals to verify a record. And I think the important differential with iNaturalist is that that record is always there. And so we can always go back to it, and we can always look at it when taxonomies are revised, or we can revise identifications. And that ability to keep updating and reflecting change is really valuable, and I think enhances the value. And just to my last slide, to give a tangible example of something that's available globally, is a tool out of the UK Ecology and Hydrology Centre developed by Michael Pocock, who's an amazing researcher in citizen science. He's done a lot of modeling, and this is a large partnership across the UK, a focus on just some specific taxa at the moment. But the tool guides users to help them understand where best to direct effort for these specific taxa across the UK. And so by using the modeling, it tells you where there are gaps and records and where your contribution might be most impactful. And so I think I love this example, and although there's obvious differences between the UK and Australia in terms of scale, I think it's absolutely where we need to head to make sure that citizen science continues to deliver impact. That's it for me. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. That was a fantastic presentation, and I particularly like that biosecurity example that you brought up. I think it's almost an immediate, response there from the department on what was literally just a photo taken on someone's phone using iNaturalist to be able to get an outcome for biodiversity. Great. Thank you so much, Erin, and we'll chat a bit more with some questions towards the end. But firstly, thank you. Yeah, cheers. Firstly, we'll go to Dr. Joanna Haddock from Saving Our Species program. She's going to highlight a fantastic project that she's running called Bats in Backyards, which demonstrates how landholders can help bring attention to and raise awareness of what are often maligned and misunderstood species, dare I say, Jo, whilst getting a lot of benefit for landholders themselves. So I'll leave it with you to give us a bit more info. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for tuning in this afternoon. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, so Ngunnawal, just outside a place called Canberra, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. So I am Jo, or Dr. Joanna Haddock, and about a year ago I worked for the New South Wales government as a threatened species officer, and about a year ago I started a citizen science project with a couple of my colleagues called Bats in Backyards, because as Joel has alluded to, they're pretty maligned. They can be fairly unpopular, and also they're kind of invisible. So these are to the tiny little microbats essentially. So they're small, they're not the flying foxes that you think of, but we'll go into that in a second. But I just wanted to say this project is open to almost everyone in New South Wales, or will be in the next few years. So I'll have details at the end of how you can all get involved. Please get involved. Okay, next go over about bats in New South Wales, what we don't know about bats, how we study them, because I find that particularly exciting, what the Bats in Backyards project is, how will the Bats in Backyards project add to our knowledge, and how you can get involved. Okay, next slide, please. So what do we know about bats? I should also apologise for the ridiculous amount of cute bat pictures in the next 10 minutes. I'm not apologising. So there's around 25% of all known mammal species in the world are bat species. So that's over 1,000 bat species in the world. There are around 800 that are microbats. So they are the ones that eat insects. They use echolocation to see, so they haven't got great eyesight. So they're the ones at the bottom, the insectivorous bats, the small one in someone's hand. And they can be as small as 3 grams fully grown. So they're really, they can be very small, very maneuverable, fast little flyers. And then there are the ones that perhaps you may be more familiar with the sight of, the ones at the top, the very cute in my book, flying foxes, otherwise known as sky puppies. They eat pollen, fruit, nectar, and they have an amazing sight and smell. So they actually, I'd like to dispel the myth as blind as a bat, because they actually have fantastic sight at night, and they can be as big as 1.5 kilograms. So that's the weight of the biggest bat in the world. Okay, next slide, please. There's 34 species of insectivorous bats in New South Wales. So these are the little microbats. There are 17 of those are listed as threatened or vulnerable or near extinction, and one sadly is thought to be extinct, the Lord Howe Island pipistrelle. So they use echolocation to hunt, navigate and communicate. So we can use their echolocation calls to differentiate between species. So we can actually tell if you have a high frequency bat detector and you point it up at the sky outside your house, you can actually tell which species is flying over your head and when, just by those little echolocation calls that are way too high in frequency for us to actually hear with our ears, but we can detect them with these special microphones. But it's quite difficult, it's quite costly. You need to know a lot about bat calls to be able to recognize species to species. So that's where we have been until recently. Okay, next slide, please. So there are large gaps in distributions for many species, and this is usually on private land. So there's been a lot of studies along the coast. There's been a lot of studies. This is specifically to New South Wales. A lot of studies in national parks and state forests, but private land is quite often either overlooked or it's just hard for government people and scientists and students to get access to, for obvious reasons. You don't want lots of people crawling around private land. But that also means that we have a bit of a black hole in terms of our knowledge of the bats and how they use private land, and particularly private land that's been, like, land use has been changed. So we also don't know much about movement patterns for many species, and that's daily to migratory. So a lot of species are migratory, but we don't know when they leave a certain area and when they arrive at another. We just kind of, and we don't know which bats are going where. So we've yet to figure all of that out. And how land use change affects activity, we don't know. And also how to engage the community to undertake habitat enhancement for insectivorous bats, and also just how to persuade people that they're super cute. I've included lots of very cute photos of bats, but I've been told that the ones where they're like snarling with their big teeth out kind of scare people. So how do we change people's minds about bats? Because I think they're fascinating. So next slide, please. This is a specific example from New South Wales BioNet. On the left, or the known and predicted map, is where we think and where we know that they are. But this is based on all of these red dots are all of the BioNet records available for this species, which is an Nyctophilus corbini, very, very cute little bat. But as you can see, even though we say, oh, we know that it's here, there's actually very few records in the BioNet for us to know that. So we're just trying to, by Bats in Backyards, is trying to like plug all these holes, basically just fill up a map so we're very, very sure where this species actually is. Okay, next slide, please. This is a very good example, Cantaloupe lyrae, the little pied bat, very cute cave-dwelling bat. But I just thought I'd show you this because it shows what a bias there is to the coast, and down to down past like west of Canberra. There's really no records in the known distribution range for the species, so it really needs a lot more investigation. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we study them? So I've alluded to echolocation. I think it's one of the most fascinating things about bats. They use kind of tiny clicks, but they make them in their pharynx and larynx, depending on what species, and they emanate them out into the environment and then listen to their echoes back, and then put together a picture of their environment, their roost or their cave. And most importantly, well, not most importantly, but maybe most importantly for the bats, they're also their prey. So they can actually hone in, and they use it almost like they laser focus in on their prey flying around. So they can detect flutters of moth wings from meters and meters and meters away using echolocation in the dark, which is phenomenal for me to think about. Joel, if you wouldn't mind clicking play on that little video and everyone can listen. So thank you. So that the little bit at the end where it speeds up is actually called a feeding buzz, where they're starting to really hone in on its prey, and it speeds up to get a better, higher definition information back from the environment for that short period of time. So we call that a feeding buzz, and it was just about to catch a moth. Hopefully it did. And this is the white-striped freetail bat. This is the only bat species in New South Wales that you're actually able to hear its echolocation calls with your own ears. So it actually calls within our hearing range at about 15 kilohertz. in terms of frequency. So I've got a commuting and a feeding buzz call. Joel, would you mind just clicking play on these? I don't know whether they are loud enough for people to hear. Or maybe not. That's okay. They're not loud enough. We can maybe go to the next slide, please. Joel, would you mind going to the next slide? Awesome. Thank you. So we've got this little bent wing bat who's also cave dependent, a very sweet. And I've actually got a video of, on the left-hand side, this is them coming back home to roost in the morning. And this is an Anna bat that's not only recording and playing it within our hearing range, but you can also see the little chirps, the little echolocation chirps on the screen. Joel, would you mind playing that video on the left-hand side? You can actually see the bats kind of flying around in the background, which is kind of cool. I think a really good way of explaining what we're doing. So next slide, please. So what is the project? Sorry, I've harped on so long about bats. What the project is we have these low-cost bat detectors that have only really become available in the last year. They're called audio moths. And we get landholders who are interested to complete an EOI, and we will send out a little bat detector. You can set it up on your property for about 3 to 5 days. You only need a fence post or a tree to tie it to. No previous experience with bats or anything like that. You send it back to us, we'll do all the call analysis, and we'll send you out a landholder report with the species you detected on your property, what they're eating on your land. So it's particularly interesting for, say, farmers who are looking at kind of cotton crops. They have a lot of insect pests, but bats have actually been shown to be about, I think it's about $60 million valuable to the Australian cotton industry alone each year. But also in that report, we include further conservation actions, other projects you can get involved in, and what you can do to help certain species on your property as well. We're making the data also publicly available on the Atlas of Living Australia. Okay, next slide, please. So these are our engagement regions for the moment. So Narrabri, Armidale, Pillar Valley, Wellington and Western Sydney. We're hoping to extend to the whole of New South Wales, but we're limited by funds and people's time at the moment. So yeah, but we're really looking forward to people who are going to submit EOIs in other areas that we could potentially kind of move into in the future. So it's definitely never going to be a no if you're interested. And next slide, please. Just for people who are perhaps not interested in filling in EOIs and giving the government your address, that's totally fine. I completely understand. I thought I'd slip this in because, you know, bats are very important, and I want you to be able to feel empowered to help them if you wish. So the main ways you can help bats on your property is to retain all hollow bearing trees and dead stags on your property. I know they can be dangerous sometimes, but do your absolute best to retain them in the landscape, because not only bats, but birds, lizards, all sorts of wildlife love hollow bearing trees. To protect and improve your native woody vegetation, to eliminate chemical insecticides. So as I said earlier, the insectivorous bats are actually shown to have a value of $60 million every year to the cotton industry, to the Australian cotton industry alone. So there is so much they can do. Wineries are looking into putting bat boxes on their properties because they love the insect pests on the vines. Do manual weed control wherever possible, just to reduce the number of chemicals on your property. To restore riparian areas, they're very important for bats and all other, and lots of other biodiversity. To install artificial hollows. So we're kind of perhaps moving away a little bit from bat boxes, but artificial hollows are amazing, and they service a lot of different species. And my pet project is limiting your light pollution. So nocturnal species are that for a reason. They love the dark. So anything you can do to limit the light pollution is amazing. Okay, next slide, please, Joel. These are 2 QR codes. Don't ask me how QR codes work, but it's magic. The left one is to take you to the project website, and the right one is if you just want to email me direct to ask for more information. That will just generate an email for you to send straight off to me. I think that is my last slide. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A, and I just thank everyone for listening.
Thank you, Jo. Goodness, those QR codes, that's very fancy. That's great. I mean,
I'm just so fancy.
That's fantastic. I'll have to bring that back up on the screen for a little bit at some point, or people can watch the recording. So it will be a recording. So if they didn't catch it at the time, you can bring your phone up and be able to, get in touch with Jo through the project and get involved. That'd be fantastic. And it's a good segue actually to phones and what they can do for us in regards to citizen science, because I wanted to take an opportunity now to cover off on some of the apps that are available for each and every one of us to be able to utilise to be involved in citizen science. And it's never been an easier time to do so through apps like this. I'm just going to go from left to right here, and Erin actually mentioned the Frog ID app, which is a fantastic and very popular app produced through the Australian Museum. It's Dr Jodie Rowley and her team there have produced what is an incredibly easy app to use. If you're in the field and you hear a frog, you can literally just open the app and push record for 30 seconds or more, and send it through to the team, and they will verify it for you, and get back to you with the species that was recorded, and it goes into the ALA. Importantly, for to increase our understanding of frogs and the health of those local frog populations. Some others that you may not be aware of, Echidna CSI, that's an initiative out of the University of Adelaide to improve the understanding of echidna distribution. So echidna being, I believe, the most wide-ranging mammal in Australia, but there are still much that we don't know about echidnas. They're quite cryptic. So you can record sightings via the app and send them to the uni to increase their understanding of population distribution, but also a means for you to be able to send through scats to the uni as well. The website actually has a guide for you if you're not actually sure what an echidna poo looks like. But I don't think you need to gift wrap it like that icon suggests. But you definitely through the app can log a recording and send through some scats for molecular analysis. So that provides an opportunity for the uni to look at health of populations as well as DNA analysis. The next two on that slide there are the turtle and wombat SAT or SATs. They're very similar interface, as you can see. The turtle is run through the 1 Million Turtles Conservation Program, which is a collaboration between researchers at Western Sydney Uni, La Trobe, University of New England, and the University of Sydney. So it's raising awareness of the plight of freshwater turtles and the impacts on them through nest predation from species such as foxes. So it's called 1 Million Turtles because they have a vision to increase the freshwater turtle populations by at least 1 million. So for landholders and land managers that have dams and other freshwater wetlands where they've got freshwater turtles, and importantly the nests of these turtles, it's a great opportunity to be able to increase our understanding through recording via the app. And then of course the wombats, a species that is very much impacted by human practices, but also through things like mange and the disease that such a debilitating disease on wombats. So you can record the observations of wombats, but also when you notice impacts of things like mange on wombats, you can do through the app, which is a fantastic initiative. That's through Western Sydney Uni. A couple more here. So we've got BirdLife, the bird data app. This one is a way for you to submit surveys and to view species distribution data. Again, this feeds into ALA and now a broader understanding, but also BirdLife Australia themselves, of course, do a lot of research and a lot of conservation, targeted conservation programs. So for those twitchers out there, those bird watchers out there who may just take sort of notes and manual lists, this is a way for you to record your survey, through either systematic surveys, so your 20-minute surveys, for example, or getting involved in some of the BirdLife Australia projects like the Birds in Backyards project that they run annually. So it's a great app. Feral Scan is powered out of the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions. It's a community pest animal recording and management tool. So you can record sightings and evidence of damage from pests, plus access species profiles, and also be able to find prescribed control methods for feral animals. And that's actually been proving very valuable for landholders across New South Wales and abroad. So then we get to, I guess, the two big ones, the iNaturalist that Erin spoke about, but also Nature Mapper. So both of which are very easy to use, where you can literally take a photo or record audio of any species, biodiversity, even fungi and mosses and those sorts of things, your plants, and then of course animals that are submitted to iNaturalist and to Nature Mapper. Erin might be able to tell us a little bit more about the data pathway with iNaturalist, because it's obviously they've got a relationship with ALA, but it is based out of California with an Australian arm, as I understand it. And Nature Mapper is Australian owned and sort of developed. It was started out of Canberra. I think it was called Canberra Mapper, and they've expanded it out amazingly to cover much of Australia. And if you see this, I don't know if you can actually see it on the screen there, but it's a fantastic graphic that comes from the Nature Mapper website, showing how the data gets from your phone to the to ALA, to other databases, and importantly, to government databases. So Erin talked about the records that were involved in that platypus situation in Illawarra. Nature Mapper are actually working with New South Wales, ACT and Queensland governments to make sure that the records that go through Nature Mapper itself are verified by experts to the degree that governments are satisfied with the those records as being verified and accurate, and then feeding into government databases. So that's where on the ground outcomes can occur, and we can get policy change. So it's a great app that's available for anyone to use. Again, literally taking a photo, and then that can feed its way through the expert verification process into databases, including ALA, but also importantly our government databases as well. And then sort of going past that to those of us who are interested in being able to identify species themselves, there are a plethora of field guides, so digitised field guides available for our keen citizen scientists to use. Frog ID was one that is an example that allows you to record access frog ecology or frog species information. But Frogs of Australia is another one that I use personally, from researchers in Queensland, including an old lecturer of mine, Gordon Grigg, who with all 241 described species of frog covered, it provides species ecology, as I said, photos, but also frog calls. So if you think it's a particular frog, you're not sure, you just want to check the call, the app's there for you to use. It also filters by your location. So you can sort of take out, all those other species that wouldn't occur in that area or aren't known to occur. And and that's a way you can use to identify frogs. Birds, well, the Michael Morecambe and the Pisian Night apps are available for you to use, both of which, like the Frogs of Australia app, can be filtered for your location and is a way for you to identify. It's got photos, illustrations, and audio recordings of birds. So again, if you want to, you're not sure exactly what it is, but you want to, but you have an idea, you can start to search through those species and sort of make, find out what the species is. And if you combine that with the BirdLife app, then you can submit those records, and then it feeds into those databases that we've been talking about. If you're a botanist or keen to be a botanist, well, we've got you covered as well in regards to Rainforest Plants of Australia and the Eucalypts of Australia apps, both of which use pretty much digitised identification keys that allow you to access information on rainforest plants and then eucalypts. So the rainforest plants, if you're unaware of the Gwen Harden books for South or for Eastern Australia, the old red and green brooks, as we colloquially call them. It's a digitised format of those, which is a fantastic app. And Eucalypts of Australia is, again, a digitised version of the Eucalypts books that have been around for several decades. Both great apps allow you to use the keys to identify species as you find them. And the DPI, the Department of Primary Industries Weedwise app, is an app, very useful app for you to use to identify weeds, provides information on the weed species identification, distributions, the biosecurity duty, meaning the landholder obligation when it comes to, control of particular species. And just like the Feral Scan app provides you with an opportunity or information on control methods, prescribed control methods. So if you've got a weed on your property and you're not sure how to control it, the Weedwise app is available there for you to provide to get information on that, which is fantastic. And one that I didn't put on this slide, which I woke up at 2 a.m. worrying about because it is actually our department's web app, is called Trees Near Me. And it might be a great starting point for those botanists that are keen to understand what species they're looking at but don't know where to start. Trees Near Me is a fantastic app that provides you with access to regional maps, plant community types, so the vegetation community that you're standing in, and a species list for that community. So it can be a really good starting point for people to find which species, what gum trees they're looking at. Check the species list there. Then through something like the Eucalypts of Australia app, you can start to narrow it down to find the species that you're looking at. That's fantastic. The Trees Near Me app. And lastly from me, just to put a call out, this is all going to coalesce into the BCT Citizen Science project that's going to run and be a main part of my job next year, called the Land Libraries Project. Why are we calling it Land Libraries? Well, it's because we want to be able to facilitate landholders cataloguing the species on their property, just like you would in a library. We're going to work with landholders to, understand and use the apps that I've just mentioned, but also to talk about the range of different survey methods that are out there that may not use the app, and loan equipment like motion cameras, or perhaps in, just like Joe mentioned, like audio moths for bats. We're going to be running workshops in regions. We're going to target a couple of pilot locations in the southeast of the state and the north coast, but hopefully, all going well, we'll run that out across the entire state towards the end of next year. First of all, a workshop on country, talking to landholders about those, collecting records using the methods that we discussed, and then a follow-up. So we'll go away, collect the data, analyse the data, and have a follow-up with landholders in 6 months' time to talk about the results, celebrate what we've achieved in regards to what species we've recorded, and then talk about the implications for management. So, what does that mean that we found this particular threatened species? We will, of course, work with the ALA and Bionet to make sure that data is, makes its way into our databases for ongoing policy and government decision. And importantly, we'd like to provide reports to landholders with species lists that we can update on an annual basis, so that we have a 6-month intensive program, but going forward over the next 12 months or so, people through iNaturalist or through Nature Mapper can continue to record species on their property, and we will then provide species lists that are updated year on year to incentivise landholders to keep being involved in what we're doing. So that will be happening next year. I very much encourage you guys to keep an ear out. It'll be prioritised for BCT agreement holders, conservation agreement holders, but depending on take-up, we could expand it out to other landholders in the area, land for wildlife people and others that are interested as well. So that's the Land Libraries Project. Keep an ear out for that. Alrighty, so I think you've spoken enough personally, and I might ask some questions from here. Hi again, Joe and Erin. Hello. We've got about 10 minutes, which is great. And I'll start with Erin. We've got, Erin, great presentation. Thank you. At what stage is the identification of the species or taxon verified? Is this done by iNaturalist or ALA themselves?
So I I guess this question just relates to iNaturalist because it would depend on the project. But if we're just talking about iNaturalist, what happens is you take a photo of whatever that might be. I just took a few of some sponge that I found on the beach this morning. And then I took a photo, put it into iNaturalist, put my location, and then actually through the AI, it gave me some suggestions of what it might be. I'm no expert, but I did my best to put in an identification. And then that goes up into the iNaturalist platform where there's a very, very large global community of users. And they'll look at that record, they'll look at the images that I put up, and they'll say if they agree with the species that I put in. If not, they'll suggest an alternative ID. And importantly, for something to become research grade, you need to get agreement on the identification by at least 2 people. And then that record will go into the ALA. Our data is refreshed weekly so that and I mentioned the value of these things is that you can continually change and refine them. And so if something goes into the atlas, but someone else has a look and disagrees with what was suggested in terms of the ID, they can change it. And then that record will continually be refreshed if need be.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erin. And I guess question from me, I'm not sure. Actually, have you had much to do with Nature Mapper itself? Are you, and I mean, if someone literally had the app, both apps there, and they wanted to collect, is one or the other better?
Yeah, so we're agnostic in terms of apps. What matters to us is that we get the data. So as you mentioned, it was originally kind of Canberra-based, but now expanding out from Australia, Australian-owned. I think what Nature Mapper does really well is build a sense of community around their projects and their initiatives. And so the Canberra area was the heart of that originally. iNaturalist has benefits. Mainly, there's sort of a larger population of global population of curators of records. And when you think about invasive species, that comes in quite handy. So these species that are native somewhere else coming into Australia, if you have someone that lives somewhere else, perhaps their identification could be more reliable or more timely. So there's certainly benefits of both. They're both super easy to use. And I think it just comes down to personal choice.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and I think as I mentioned in the discussion, my presentation just a second ago, it is important, and I saw that Nature Mapper are actually talking with New South Wales Bionet to make sure that data can make its way into Bionet. So that's really important, I think, part of it. But yeah, great, both great apps. All right, so another question here. So, Dr. Jo, can you please expand on why you are moving away from bat boxes in favour of artificial hollows?
I probably shouldn't have even said that. Look, it's a bit contentious. So in the bat world, which is not that big. So essentially, bat boxes are fantastic, and I am not like leading them into disrepute or anything, but bat boxes quite often, because they are of a similar kind of shape and depth and things, so they have thermal kind of properties inherently, and they favor certain species. So you might set up 10 bat boxes, and a lot of those bat boxes, if something takes up residence, if a bat species takes up residence, more often than not we'd see it be 2 of the more common species, which is absolutely great and fine when you're trying to kind of replace habitat. So if you take down a tree with hollows in it and you're trying to replace habitat, then any habitat is very, very important. But when you're trying to support more kind of like less common or rare species with more specific habitat requirements and roost requirements, it's better to look at lots of different types of roost supplementation. Like a lot of people are now looking at artificial hollows. So actually, where appropriate and properly, when people are properly trained to do this, people can cut holes in trees and stags to kind of I guess emulate more accurately what would have been happening with hollows and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the thermoregulation of those artificial hollows sort of better mimic a natural hollow compared to bat boxes at times, can't they? Like staying cool during the day and those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about aspect as well.
Yeah.
So quite often bat boxes, if they're put on the wrong side of the tree, they're just not right for any bat species. So yeah, artificial hollows are a lot more reliable, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Do BCT survey records get ported to ALA? So that's, I guess, a broader question that perhaps you could help me out with, Erin, in regards to sort of, how ALA collects data from other areas, because the BCT survey records will ultimately make their way into BioNet, but ALA do harvest from BioNet, don't they, and other sources, like BirdLife, for example.
Yeah, so government is a huge and important source of information for the ALA. So without being able to verify that particular instance, if it's in BioNet, it should be theoretically also in the Atlas. And we're also just coming up with an event system in the ALA, and this should afford us the ability to pull in even more data. And by this, I mean getting better at relating observations. So if you take something like myrtle rust, which affects the myrtaceae, people want to know about both the presence of the myrtle rust, so that observation, as well as the host plant, because that information is critical. And so we're developing the kind of relational databases that will allow us to also display that kind of information as well.
Great, thanks, Erin. I've got another one here that asks, you used the term interoperable regarding citizen science data or apps, and what does this mean?
Yeah, sorry, that may be a big word to pull out. So try and make this a short answer. So the ALA, to be able to present all of this aggregated data or data that's been sort of meshed together, if you will, uses a data standard called Darwin Core. So that's some agreed fields. And so what I meant by interoperable is making sure that the metadata and the data standard used by citizen science is able to be pulled in with relative ease to large data aggregators like the ALA that conform to that data standard that we use. If that makes sense.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Joe, great presentation. I have a song meter mini bat recorder. Have you experienced with this recorder? Could it provide records into your program?
Yes, song meters are great. Song meters are way more expensive than the audio mods that we are using. So song meters are fantastic. Yep, and they certainly can. So if you have, I think song meters have SD memory cards. So if you're interested in putting out your song meter and having your calls analyzed by bats in backyards, I'm pretty sure the project would be very, very interested.
Okay, so that's a call out. If you've got an audio moth, I know there's some consultants out there too that regularly do work on private land as part of their, monitoring or as part of a DA or something like that. I probably have to ask your client, but regardless, I think it'd be, it's a call out to anyone that has these recorders then, that perhaps they could just send the data through and have it analysed and be part of your program.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, hopefully. Yeah, within reason.
Yes,
definitely.
of course,
yeah.
of course.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. So I'm just going to, one from Ian. I understand the need for a photo or other evidence, but it can be hard to get a photo of small or cryptic species. Thus, many observations are lost. Any solutions?
I feel Ian's pain. I was trying to get a bandicoot the other day, and of course, could not do that. And I think that very fact probably also accounts for a lot of data bias. So that's why citizen science data is heavily weighted towards the large and the charismatic. Solutions. let me think about that for a while. I mean, obviously the fact that we can also use acoustics helps us with frogs and birds, IDs,
And bats.
Yeah, and bats, of course, Joe, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, macro lenses, which are becoming a lot more affordable. I've heard that the latest smartphones are amazing at taking very high-res, detailed photographs. So I think that we can also look to technology as one solution, but that won't help us with the ones that are simply too fast that get away.
Yeah. Yep. Can you take? I should know this. Can you upload? I guess it's through the website to upload images that you've collected on non-smartphones, so off your SLR, for example. Best way to do that through the website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely
Great.
do that.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess that's a way to, for your macros or for those really good photos or, species that are quite hard to tell apart would only be best through an SLR. That's the way to do it. We're almost out of time, or we are out of time. Just thinking, what areas are you targeting for bats in backyards this year? You did cover that, didn't you, Jo? Just quickly, once more, please.
Yep, Narrabri, Wellington, Armadale, Pillar Valley on the north coast, and Western Sydney.
Yep, great. But if you're outside of that region, still very much sort of pay attention or get in touch with you. Is that the way to go?
Absolutely. Still complete the EOI or drop me an email. I find it very hard to say no for people who are excited about bats. So
there you go. What a way to finish up. Thank you so much, Jo, and thank you, Erin, for being involved today. It's fantastic, and I hope that's a really good call to action for people to get involved and, with Jo's project or just in general through iNaturalist and other apps to, collect that data, get involved. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And that's it from us for 2023. It's been a pretty quick year. It's flown like they all tend to do as we get older. We're yet to establish our webinar lineup for 2024, importantly. So, look, we have a few ideas, but we'd love your input as to the topics we should cover. So we've built a survey, so it should come up in the little comments here. So those that are calling in live, if you could have a look at that survey and just give us a few of your ideas or check off on the ones that we've provided as to whether, what would be valuable for you to learn more about and to hear about. We'd really appreciate you filling out that form. Thanks for being involved in our BCT webinar series for 2023 and the conservation community in general. It's going to be a hot summer, so make sure you look after each other and help support the wildlife that share your patch. And before we go, you haven't had enough of me, have you? So you're going to get some more. I've just wanted to share a video that we put together last year with yours truly, just on how to survey or things to think about when surveying for species on your property. So stick around for that, and otherwise we shall see you next year. Thank you so much. Cheers. Hey guys, I'm Joel, and I'm an ecologist at the Biodiversity Conservation Trust. Part of my role is to help you, our landholders, to understand and appreciate the biodiversity that shares the land you've chosen to protect. Today, I'll be looking at ways that you can identify and record the biodiversity on your property and highlight how that information can help build our understanding of biodiversity in New South Wales. When we identify biodiversity on properties, there are generally three main things we look at: the flora or plant species, the plant community within which the plants occur, and the fauna or fauna habitat that we see on the property. The flora or plant species is the tricky one. There can be up to 100 species of plant life in just a 20 metre by 20 metre area. Of course, it's great to have a lot of diversity. The more the merrier, right? But this can be a challenge to understanding which species are there, particularly if you've never identified plant species in the past. The quickest way to gain some knowledge is to spend some time out and about with someone who knows the plants of the area. Is there a local land care group that you can join? Or does your neighbour have a good understanding of the plants on their property? Regardless, don't be overwhelmed and don't expect to remember every species in one go. become familiar with the more common and conspicuous species, such as the trees or the flowering plants, and build from there. A local field guide is a great reference. Field guides are available that cover most of New South Wales, and there are now great apps for your mobile device. A statewide list of plant species, fully equipped with identification keys, is available for those who want to dive deeper. Search for New South Wales PlantNet or see the link below to check it out. As you move around and familiarise yourself with the plants on your property, you may notice that some species naturally become more or less common. In fact, you may find that one area has a completely different suite of species to another. Together, we call the diversity of trees, shrubs and ground cover plants in an area a plant community. And you may have several different communities on your property. Many of the plant communities in New South Wales have been categorised and mapped, and you can register through the New South Wales Government's Bionet to get a map of the plant communities in your area and a list of the common species that occur within them. Follow the link below to guide you through the process. Now, identifying and recording fauna is perhaps a little simpler, but the thing with animals is that they move and they hide. For birds and frogs, although they're very different, there are similarities in that they can be identified by their calls. Catching a glimpse is always cool and can be very helpful, but over time you can learn the local bird and frog calls enough to identify them without even seeing them. As with plants, this can be a gradual process, but there are great bird and frog ID field guides and apps that can help you build your knowledge of what they look like and what they sound like. Mammals and reptiles are trickier. Most are quiet and shy, so how many species you see can vary every time you go out. Many mammals are active at dawn and dusk or are nocturnal. Reptiles might be the same in summer, but in the cooler months they may not be active until the sun provides sufficient warmth. So, take into account the season and time your walks to when the local animals are at their most active. And then there's the most plentiful yet often overlooked fauna species, our invertebrates. They are so numerous and so diverse, in fact, that identifying each species is unrealistic. But just taking a sample and appreciating the different types you collect is an amazing experience. Leaf litter samples in the forest or using a sweep net in the grassland is a great way to sample the ground invertebrates. And something like a bee hotel can provide habitat whilst allowing you to get up close and personal with the native pollinators. And if you're on the river or have a dam, grab that net to sample the water bugs too. Identification keys are available online if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, and there's a water bug app too. And finally, it's a great idea to take note of the habitat that's available for fauna. Fallen timber and hollow-bearing trees are important habitat features for things like quolls, gliders and microbats. And if you have these features, you may have these animals too, even if you don't spot them that often. And if you are missing these features, you can look to supplement the habitat available by bringing in fallen logs or using artificial hollows. For more information, make sure you check out our video and guidelines on artificial hollows on the BCT website. Overall, be sure to keep good notes of what you see and hear along the way. Taking photos is perfect for capturing a visual record for later identification, and even undervalued elements of biodiversity like fungi and lichens can be identified through photos. Keep an eye out for evidence of animal activity in the form of scats, tracks or tree scratchings, and don't forget the benefits of modern technology in the form of motion sensor cameras or song meters, which can record what's about when you're not. Try setting up cameras near water points or large hollow logs, or even pointing at a tree that has lots of scratches or a large hollow in it. Bait traps can also be used to attract animals to cameras so you can get a happy snap. Field guides are your friend for all forms of biodiversity, but there are also a stack of social media ID groups that can assist as well. Remember too that the BCT are here to help, so please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any questions about documenting the species on your property. Well, there you have it, guys. Just a glimpse of the ways that you can better understand and appreciate the biodiversity that shares your property. Adding to the species list at your place can be immensely satisfying, but it's also incredibly valuable for us to increase our knowledge of where species occur. Be sure to keep the BCT up to date with interesting observations, and Bionet allows for your data to be entered into the statewide database to help better inform policy that protects biodiversity into the future. That's it from me, guys. Now get out there, survey away and have fun. Thanks for watching.